Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Matthew spent the entire afternoon planning the surprise. As he drove along the winding roads leading to the bar where Allison's company party was taking place, a quiet smile lingered at the corner of his mouth. They had been married for 8 years, and even after all this time, he still liked small gestures, like showing up unannounced to let her know he cared. Allison had said it would just be a casual dinner with colleagues, something informal, no guests, so he decided not to tell her. He wanted to see her reaction when she saw him there out of nowhere. He imagined a tight hug, maybe a surprised kiss, and the coworkers laughing at the unexpected interruption. But what awaited him was a kind of surprise he would never forget. As soon as he parked, Matthew entered the main hall of the bar. The place was full of conversations, toasts, and laughter. He recognized some faces from Allison's workplace from the photos she often showed. He looked for her among the tables but didn't see her. He thought maybe she was in the bathroom or outside talking to someone. He decided to walk around, take a quick look. He passed through the outside area, crossed the side, and made his way to the parking lot. That's when he stopped. A few feet away, leaning against the car she herself had driven there, Allison was with another man. Shaved, well-dressed, with the air of self-confidence in the way he held her by the waist. They were kissing slowly, without rush, as if they were completely comfortable in that space, in that moment. For a moment, Matthew thought his mind was making it up, distorting some scene. But it wasn't. It was real. The woman he loved, who shared his life, was kissing another man. Right there in the parking lot, while he carried the expectation of a romantic surprise in his chest. He stood still for a few seconds, as if time had paused around him. His heart was racing, his stomach churning. There was no immediate anger, just a state of denial, a foolish attempt to understand what was in front of his eyes. When he regained control over himself, he started to approach, firmly. The man noticed first. He released Allison and took a step back. She turned her face, and upon seeing Matthew, she paled instantly. The shock in her eyes said everything. She knew the weight of that moment. "Matt. What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice shaky, as if she was still trying to find an explanation. He took a deep breath, keeping his eyes on her. "I think the right question is, what are you doing here?" She didn't answer. Her breathing accelerated and her hands trembled. The other man, visibly uncomfortable, left the scene, heading in the opposite direction, probably to escape the confrontation forming. Matthew didn't make a scene. He simply looked at Allison for a few seconds and then turned around and walked away. Allison ran after him, saying things that didn't make sense at that moment. Scattered words, please, tears. But Matthew kept going until he reached the car and got in. His eyes burned. His chest felt compressed from inside. Starting the car was almost an automatic gesture. The ride back home was made in the cruelest silence of his life. More than betrayal, it felt like a breaking of reality. It was as if everything he had lived until then had been a lie now unraveling into pieces before his eyes. In memory, came flashes of the last days, she more distant, messages on her phone with ready-made excuses, laughs that once seemed common. Now everything made sense. And what hurt most was realizing that while he planned a gesture of love, she chose a moment to live something in secret, away from him, with another man. The kind of pain that consumes from within isn't the one that shouts. It's the one that silently corrodes, leaving a bitter taste in every thought, every memory. Getting home was a test of endurance. He looked at the couch, at the table where they used to have dinner together, at the frames on the wall. Every corner of the house seemed to mock him. He went to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and stayed there, eyes fixed on a random point. He felt his legs heavy, his breathing uneven, as if he was trying not to collapse. He wanted to understand how it happened. He wanted answers, but he wasn't sure he was ready to hear them. Still, he knew he needed to listen. A little later, Allison arrived. Red-faced, swollen eyes. Bringing a mix of desperation and guilt. She asked to talk, begged for space to explain. Matthew looked at her in silence for long seconds. She was there, in front of the woman he loved, but something inside him had already changed. The trust, built over years, had been destroyed in minutes. And he knew what was coming next would be even harder than that moment in the parking lot. It was the beginning of the end. Or maybe just the start of something he still couldn't name. Allison stood at the door with red eyes and faltering breath. Her hands clasped together, as if trying to stop the despair from spilling out. Matthew remained seated at the table, staring fixedly at the coffee cup he had made and left untouched. The sound of the key turning in the lock still echoed in his head, as if that moment marked the beginning of a new life or the definitive end of the old one. He raised his eyes, locked eyes with hers, and said only one sentence, "Sit down. We need to talk." She sat down without saying a word. The silence was thick, loaded with everything yet to be said. Matthew leaned his elbows on the table and interlaced his fingers, trying to stay in control. He wanted to understand, even though part of him had already decided nothing would justify what he saw. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, without changing tone. Allison squeezed her eyes shut, as if that could avoid the impact of the question. The tears returned, but he remained silent, waiting for the answer. After a few seconds, she spoke, almost a whisper. 2 months. It felt like something tore inside him. It wasn't just the number of days or the time itself. It was thinking about everything they had gone through in those 2 months while she fed a lie. Matthew stood up and walked to the sink. He turned on the tap, washed his face, and returned. He wanted to stay calm, even though inside he was falling apart. "Why did you do this?" he asked. She took a deep breath, trembling. Said she felt lonely, that he was always busy with work, that their conversations had become scarce. Claimed she didn't seek another relationship, but that she got involved without planning. Matthew listened without interrupting. In a way, he had expected these justifications. What he hadn't expected was the weight of hearing them with that sincerity drenched in tears. "So instead of talking to me, you chose to kiss another man in the parking lot?" Allison shook her head and said she didn't want to hurt him. Matthew chuckled from the corner of his mouth, a short laugh without humor. "You already did." She tried to hold back her emotions, but her voice collapsed. She pleaded for forgiveness with a desperation that seemed sincere, as if only now had she understood the gravity of the choice she made. She said she regretted it from the first day, but was unable to stop. Admitted that the other man was a coworker, someone with whom she shared projects, schedules, short trips. That it began with innocent conversations, until it crossed the line. Matthew listened in silence. His mind split between the past and what he had just heard. Each memory of the last 2 months now reorganized under a new perspective. The shorter messages, the days when she said she was too tired, the delays that never had a clear explanation. Now it all made sense. He didn't feel anger, which might have been worse. It was a mixture of deep disappointment and emotional exhaustion. Like everything had suddenly emptied out. "Did you sleep with him?" The question came like a sharp knife, cutting through the table, slicing the air. Allison hesitated. Then she lowered her head and nodded shyly. Matthew closed his eyes for a few seconds. He didn't say anything else. He got up, went to the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out a suitcase. He packed some clothes quietly. Allison stood in the hallway, watching everything, without strength to stop him. "I'm going to Lisa's for a few days. I need to think." She asked him not to go. Said they could talk, seek help, therapy, whatever was necessary. But at that moment, Matthew didn't have space for anything beyond what he carried inside. He grabbed the suitcase, wallet, keys, and left. At his sister's house, he found shelter, but not peace. Lisa tried to talk, but he avoided the subject. He only said he needed time. He spent hours staring at the ceiling or sitting on the porch. When the phone vibrated, he knew it was Allison. The messages accumulated, long ones, short ones, some with trembling voices, others just with the word sorry. He read some, ignored others. He didn't reply. One of those nights, Lisa placed tea on the coffee table and asked, "Do you still love her?" Matthew took a while to respond. He said yes, but that maybe it wasn't enough anymore. That loving someone who lied for 2 months and still had the courage to act as if everything was fine was like trying to hold water with your hands. Eventually, it slips away. And that was what he felt, everything slipping through his fingers. The pain might pass. The memory wouldn't. And this would be decisive for what came next. The days at Lisa's dragged on between silence and the constant attempt to push aside thoughts that insisted on returning. The image of the kiss in the parking lot still invaded Matthew's mind without asking permission, even when he tried to fill his time with simple tasks. Every notification on his phone, the name of Allison lighting up on the screen like an reopened wound. The messages varied, some long, others with repeated apologies, others with dry phrases, as if she alternated between desperation and resignation. He read them, but couldn't reply. After a week, he decided to return home. He needed to regain control of his own life, take care of bills, work, obligations that had been put on hold. Allison had already left, respecting the space he had asked for. When he entered, the house felt smaller. Her scent still lingered in some corners, but gradually he opened the windows and let the air circulate. He removed some pictures from the photo frame and put them in the bottom drawer. Moving that stuff hurt, but delaying it would only prolong the wound. The next morning, he called a lawyer and scheduled a meeting. He didn't want to wait any longer. When infidelity is confessed and yet doesn't stop further attempts at closeness, what remains is the need to protect one's dignity. The divorce process was initiated, and he signed the first documents with a strange feeling of announced end. The marriage certificate remained on the table, but now it was just a piece of paper stained by the truth. Allison reacted with despair. She called dozens of times, sent emails, wrote handwritten letters. She showed up at his house with a grocery bag full of ingredients he liked, saying she wanted to cook like before. He thanked her, but asked her to leave. He was tired of empty promises. He said he still felt something for her, but that he no longer trusted her. And without trust, any gesture sounded like manipulation. She left crying, leaving the bag on the porch. He donated everything to a neighbor. Weeks passed. The divorce was completed. Each one moved on with their commitments, but the story didn't end. Allison continued to show up. She said she would start again from zero, that she could wait as long as necessary, that she just wanted another chance. He tried to keep distance, was polite, but firm. Nonetheless, she persisted. She sent messages with phrases like, "Remember that trip," or "Saw something today that reminded me of you." Time passed, and Matthew remained silent. He was tired. That was no longer nostalgia. It was attachment disguised as regret. Meanwhile, he met Brooke, a history teacher who taught at a nearby school. She didn't ask too many questions, didn't force proximity. That's why he felt comfortable. The beginning was slow, without rush. A coffee, then another, some longer conversations. Slowly, Matthew realized he was smiling again without feeling guilty about it. Allison found out about Brooke through a photo posted by a mutual friend. Matthew appeared smiling, beside Brooke, at a small street festival. It was a simple image, but it was enough to light the fuse. 3 days later, Brooke received a visit at the school. Allison went there, introduced herself as Matthew's wife, and said he was confused. She told a distorted version of the facts, saying they were still married and that he was emotionally unstable. Brooke, surprised, tried to understand what was happening. That night, she called Matthew and asked them to be direct. She wanted to know what was true about it. Without hesitation, he showed her the divorce papers, explained everything from the beginning, told her about the kiss in the parking lot, the confession, the separation. Brooke was silent for several minutes, digesting everything. She said she was relieved to hear the truth, but also scared of Allison's actions. She suggested filing a formal complaint. Matthew still hesitated. He thought it was an exaggeration. Said maybe it was just a phase of hers, that with time it would pass. He preferred to avoid involving authorities. But Brooke insisted that it was necessary to protect what they were starting. And if Allison had crossed a line, she might cross others. The next day, the two of them went to the police station. They filed a report, documenting Allison's visit to Brooke's workplace and the attempt to manipulate information. The officer suggested requesting a protective order. Matthew hesitated again, but eventually agreed. The restraining order was granted. Allison was notified to stay away, with no physical or virtual contact. For a few weeks, it seemed to work. No messages, no appearances. Brooke returned to teaching with more tranquility, and Matthew returned to routine without hiccups. But peace was brief. One day, Brooke left work and found her rearview mirror broken. No security cameras captured the moment, but there was a flower on the windshield, the same one Allison used to wear in her hair. The tension returned. Matthew began to feel pursued. Even though he tried to move forward, there was always a shadow lingering nearby. The legal measures were in effect, but they didn't seem sufficient. He started checking the door twice before leaving, looked around in parking lots, avoided public places for dates. Living under tension was exhausting, but the worst was yet to come. Allison was only beginning to show how far she was willing to go. Matthew spent the night awake, mentally reviewing each decision he had made since the beginning of the separation. He was tired of living between fear and the hope that Allison would just give up. That flower left in Brooke's car was the trigger. It wasn't just symbolic, it was an aggressive reminder that she was still around, even when the law said otherwise. He didn't want to make decisions based on panic, but he understood that a boundary had been crossed. It was no longer about regret. It was stalking. 2 days later, Brooke received a message on her cell phone from an unknown number. The text said, "Be careful. He's still my husband. This hasn't ended." She showed the message to Matthew, and the two of them returned to the police station to add this new evidence to the ongoing case. The officer, now more attentive to the recurrence, emphasized the need for surveillance. The restraining order was already in effect, but the reports and evidence were accumulating. The local prosecutor joined the case and filed a request for preventive detention in case of further violations. A week later, what was expected happened. Allison showed up in front of Brooke's school during dismissal time. Standing there, arms crossed, she approached two of Brooke's co-workers and asked where she was. She said she needed to resolve a personal matter. One of the co-workers discreetly informed Brooke, who hid in the teacher's room and called Matthew. He arrived shortly after, saw Allison still standing there, and called the police. She was arrested on the spot. She tried to resist, saying she just wanted to talk, that she loved her ex-husband, that she never intended to hurt anyone. The speech didn't move the officers. There was already a history, evidence, and a clear violation of the court order. She was taken to the station, and hours later, Monica, Allison's older sister, paid the bail. The family tried to argue that she was emotionally unstable, that she needed psychological help, not punishment. But even with provisional freedom, her behavior didn't change. As soon as she was released, she went straight to Matthew's house. She knocked on the door multiple times, shouting that she needed to talk. Said they had a history, that they couldn't let everything end like this. The neighbor in front recorded everything with her phone and called the police again. When the agents arrived, she tried to run. She was contained and arrested again. This time, however, the judge who reviewed the case considered the relapse serious. Bail was denied. She would be kept in custody until the final hearing, which could take weeks. Matthew was shocked to learn that she had gone directly to his house right after being released from prison. By now, it was impossible to believe in any trace of good sense coming from her. The obsession had become dangerous, suffocating. Brooke, despite her fear, tried to stay calm. But it was clear that staying there was risky. The authorities were doing everything possible, but the feeling was that at any moment everything could start again. They couldn't live with peace of mind. They avoided going out together in public, checked the surroundings before parking, changed simple daily habits. They were exhausted. That's when Matthew proposed something he had been maturing in silence. Moving to another city. Starting over somewhere else, away from memories, away from constant tension. The idea didn't please Brooke at first. She had roots, students, colleagues, routines. But after Allison's second arrest, she realized this wasn't just a bad ending of a relationship. It was a situation that put their freedom and peace at risk. Matthew contacted a childhood friend who lived in Asheville, North Carolina, and who was offering a job opening at a local company. The salary was good, the cost of living lower, and the possibility of living without fear was what weighed most heavily on the scale. The decision was made with a mix of relief and pain. Leaving the city where he grew up, where he built memories, was a silent morning. They packed the house in less than a week. Matthew informed the local police, gave the new data to his lawyer, and left a copy of the case with the friendly neighbor. The idea was to cut all possible ties with the past. Brooke transferred her documents to the new school and resigned in person, without giving many details. When they arrived in the new city, the air seemed different. There was still uncertainty, but the feeling of freedom slowly filled the spaces. Matthew started the new job with dedication. Brooke found new students, with new stories. They began to go out more, to smile more. The memory of Allison still appeared in conversations, but it no longer dominated their thoughts. It was like a scar, visible, but healed. Meanwhile, Allison waited for the trial in custody. Her public defender tried to argue that she needed treatment, not detention, but the extensive history of violations and the risk to the physical integrity of others made the case delicate. Justice finally recognized that obsessive love, when it crosses all boundaries, becomes a real threat. Matthew learned that protecting his peace was more important than insisting on saving something already dead. He loved, was betrayed, forgave in silence, and had empathy as far as possible. When he realized that this story was destroying not only him but everyone around him, he chose to live. And it was this choice that, little by little, returned to him what Allison had stolen, the right to breathe without fear. The new city brought a different kind of silence, less burdened. Matthew and Brooke began building a routine where the past no longer commanded every thought. They started sleeping without having to lock 3 doors. They went out to dinner, walked in the central plaza, talked about plans with more ease. The feeling of renewal wasn't just an idea. It was a daily practice, built step by step. Brooke reconnected with her profession, and Matthew dedicated himself to the company with the desire to leave behind the image of a man marked by a traumatic divorce. Everything seemed, finally, to reorganize. The news of Allison's sentence came through the lawyer. She would remain detained indefinitely until a complete psychiatric evaluation and judicial deliberation. The defense couldn't reverse the history of violations, nor convince the judge that she presented conditions for stable social coexistence. Matthew read the notice and left the paper on the table, as if that was the final point he had been waiting for months. He didn't comment on it that day. Just breathed deeply and went to work. He didn't feel satisfaction, only relief. The obsession that had consumed the woman he once loved was now treated as a clinical case, which perhaps should have been since the beginning. A few weeks later, during dinner with friends he had made in the new city, Brooke was surprised by a gift left on her desk at school, a drawing made by one of her students, depicting her and Matthew smiling. She showed it to him at the end of the day, and the two laughed. It was a piece of innocence amid so many marks. That night, sitting side by side on the couch, she asked if he regretted trying to save the marriage when everything started to fall apart. He answered that he didn't. He said that loving, even when it hurts, is still part of the experience of someone who lives with truth. What he no longer tolerated was allowing pain to dictate choices. And that he had overcome. Time passed, and life finally found stability. Brooke became pregnant. The news caught the two of them off guard, but it was received with emotion. Matthew cried silently in the bathroom when he saw the positive test. It wasn't fear. It was the weight of everything they had gone through transformed into something new, alive, pure. They redecorated the room, began planning the future. With each ultrasound, the connection between them grew stronger. The experience that began marked by distrust and threats gave way to a bond built with patience, honesty, and care. On the day of the birth, Matthew held his daughter in his arms and felt something he couldn't explain. It was as if everything he had suffered had led him there. The difficult choices, the sleepless nights, the feeling of defeat, everything now seemed small in the face of that moment. There was no more room for grudges. Allison, with all the damage she caused, was now just a past chapter. What remained was the certainty that moving forward, even when everything hurts, is still the most courageous path someone can choose. And he chose. Firmly. With dignity. And with love. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.